The kind of hour when the country feels suspended, when hospital lights glow in empty streets, long-haul truckers sip stale coffee, and parents finally sleep after another exhausting day of trying to make ends meet. Most Americans were asleep, unaware that while the nation rested, one of the most powerful men in the world was wide awake, tapping furiously at his phone. Donald Trump wasn't drafting policy. He wasn't addressing a national emergency. He wasn't comforting families or outlining solutions. Instead, the internet was being flooded. Post after post. Email after email. Statements fired into the void with increasing urgency. To anyone watching closely, the pattern was unsettling. This wasn't calculated messaging or strategic timing. It felt impulsive, emotional, almost frantic. Each message arrived heavier than the last, as if something unseen was pressing down hard, and time was slipping away. And it wasn't happening in a vacuum. Earlier that same day, new documents and images connected to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation had been released by members of the House Oversight Committee. The disclosures reignited old questions, questions that many believed had been buried by power, influence, and time. For years, Trump had insisted he knew nothing about Epstein. He had said it from podiums, interviews, even the Oval Office itself. But timing matters. And so does behavior. Because on this night, this specific night, Trump's online outburst didn't look like coincidence. It looked like reaction. So what exactly was he doing at 1 a.m.? He wasn't addressing the allegations directly. Instead, he pivoted hard. He lashed out at Republican lawmakers in Indiana, accusing them of betrayal for voting against a measure backed by House Republicans. The posts weren't vague. They weren't general critiques. He named names, called out individuals, demanded loyalty. And then came the warnings. Trump openly suggested these officials should face political consequences. He hinted that support, federal support, might not come so easily to those who didn't fall in line. Within hours, Indiana state officials responded publicly, issuing warnings of their own. They accused Trump of threatening to withhold federal assistance and emergency funding. That kind of pressure doesn't sit quietly in a democracy. It echoes. Even within his own party, alarms began to sound. This wasn't negotiation. This wasn't leadership. This was leverage. In any other political era, behavior like this would have dominated front pages. It would have sparked urgent debates about power, ethics, and the limits of authority. But this wasn't any other era. Much of the media treated it as routine. Another night. Another outburst. Another headline that would be forgotten by morning. And that normalization, quiet, subtle, and dangerous, was perhaps the most alarming part of all. As the night stretched on, Trump shifted gears again. He praised himself as one of the most important presidents of the last 100 years. He shared glowing assessments of his legacy. He amplified voices that celebrated him as history's misunderstood savior. All of this while millions of Americans lay awake for very different reasons. Parents staring at ceiling fans, calculating bills in their heads. Workers wondering if the next round of layoffs would reach their department. Retirees checking shrinking savings accounts, hoping inflation wouldn't rise again. Grocery prices were still high. Rent was climbing. Mortgage rates remained punishing. Job security, once taken for granted, had become fragile. For many families, survival had turned into a careful balancing act. One unexpected expense could unravel everything. Yet somewhere in the glow of a phone screen, Trump was celebrating himself. At the same time, global tensions were escalating. Conflicts simmered. Alliances strained. Diplomatic language hardened. The world felt unstable in a way that couldn't be ignored. Still, Trump repeatedly referred to himself as a peacemaker. The contradiction was striking. Words of peace, paired with rhetoric that inflamed. Claims of unity, delivered through division. Declarations of strength, masking fragility. As observers scrolled through his platform, another detail stood out, one that felt less like coincidence and more like design. Recruitment ads. Political messaging. Law enforcement promotions. They appeared relentlessly, woven between posts like a drumbeat. Questions followed quickly. Who was funding these ads? Why this intensity? Why now? Transparency was scarce. Answers were vague. And then came the emails. They arrived directly in inboxes, long, emphatic defenses of controversial pardons. Trump framed them as acts of justice, as corrections to a flawed system. He portrayed himself as the ultimate authority on fairness. But for many Americans, especially those personally affected, the story felt very different. Survivors came forward. Families spoke out. Voices long quieted by grief and exhaustion were heard again. They talked about wounds reopening, about years of healing undone by a single signature, about the message these pardons sent, that power could erase accountability, that influence mattered more than consequence. Their pain didn't trend. It didn't go viral. But it was real. Still, friendly media outlets moved quickly to defend Trump. They dismissed criticism as exaggeration. They insisted the economy was thriving. They waved away public frustration as misinformation or pessimism. But reality doesn't live on television panels. It lives in grocery aisles, in rent checks, in gas receipts, in break rooms where workers whisper about cuts. Everyday Americans know the truth, not because they read it somewhere, but because they live it every single day. They see wealth concentrating at the top. They feel the distance growing between effort and reward. They watch opportunity narrow while promises multiply. No amount of spin can erase that. As documents surfaced and images circulated, unanswered questions piled higher. Quietly, almost invisibly, something else began to happen. People started paying attention again. Not as an explosion of outrage, but as a slow, steady return, rooted in memory and in experience. Democracy doesn't erode overnight. It fades when people stop noticing. This moment wasn't about one man, one night, or one viral post. It was about patterns. Patterns of power reacting to challenge. Patterns of accountability delayed or deflected. Patterns where truth appears not as a single revelation but in fragments. A ledger here, a photo there, a behavior that does not align with the story being told. History rarely announces itself with trumpets. Sometimes it whispers at 1 a.m., in kitchen lights and hospital corridors, in the tired conversations between neighbors. The question for Americans is not whether they are watched, manipulated, or distracted. Those forces have always existed. The question is whether they will choose to stay awake. To ask harder questions. To demand clearer answers. To remember that leadership is measured not by volume but by responsibility. Accountability does not arrive on its own. It is pulled forward by people who refuse to look away. There are ordinary scenes that reveal why this matters. A teacher grading tests under a small desk lamp, worried about class sizes next year. A small shop owner balancing invoices and wondering if support ever comes. A veteran waiting at a clinic, thinking about the promises made and the help still owed. These are not abstractions. They are the neighbors we borrow sugar from and the faces in the grocery line. In kitchens and town halls, conversations that used to circle weather or sports now drift back to a single thread. How do we make power answerable? The answers are not dramatic single acts. They arrive in persistence. People showing up at school board meetings, voting with deliberation, writing letters that become a steady drumbeat. Civic strength grows in small, repeated acts. The parent who checks a claim before resharing it, the neighbor who helps a displaced family, the community group that tracks not complacent patience, but courageous endurance, a refusal to let outrage be the only currency. If democracy is a living thing, it needs care. Attention alone is not enough. It requires steady tending. When people commit to that work, not because a headline demands it but because they feel the stakes in their lives, systems begin to bend toward justice. So the measure of this moment is not the scandal that makes morning news. It is whether that scandal becomes a turning point, whether fragments accumulate into reform, into institutions that answer to people and to truth, or whether the slow erosion continues until whispers become shouts too late to act. It will demand patience, honesty, small sacrifices, and daily commitments from neighbors, families, and strangers alike. The choice is human, local, and immediate. It begins with each of us taking steps. It asks for more than noise. It asks for steady, courageous care. Somewhere between late-night posts and morning headlines, the future is being decided by those who refuse to look away. That is the work before us, small, persistent, necessary. The future we want depends on whether we will do it.